Last night, on this program, I demonstrated how the nuclear power plant worked. I tried to show with M&Ms, I mean, it's really, look, it's a 5 o'clock show, low budget. But I tried to tell you that this thing was really protected, unless the protective shell was damaged. Well, there's an update today, but the media is not giving you any context. The evidence of this, you ready for that? Pharmacies in California are running out of iodine. That's a radiation antidote. Now, that's one of two things. That means that the press has hyped this up so much that people in California think, oh my gosh, we could get sick because of the plant over in Japan. Or they have hyped up the fact that earthquakes are a fact of life, and there are power plants in California, and people are waking up to it somehow for the first time, and they're like, maybe we should prepare for the worst and hope for the best so we can be like the people of Japan and not panic. One is noble. Prepare. And then be your highest self. Help others. That's noble. The other is shameless hype. I don't know what you're going to say the press is doing right now, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think they're trying to be noble. And I ask them now to help me. Encourage people to prepare for a possible economic meltdown that is more likely to happen than all of the power plants in California melting down. Let me start with some perspective here on what they say is happening now and give you some perspective, because people will hear these words. Do you know what a nuclear rod means when it's exposed? Do you? Because I didn't until yesterday. I have no idea. I don't really do that. So let's go through them. Nuclear rods exposed. That's what they're saying. Well, the news presents this as if that means it's all over. Meltdown is coming. No. Bring my M&M nuclear power plant in here. No, this is what it means. It means, remember I showed you this last night? Here's the containment facility. Here's the actual reactor in here, and there's water in here. And what this means is the nuclear rods here, they're controlled by water because you want the water to boil and make steam. So now these rods are exposed like that. That's it. It just means the water has boiled down to expose the rods, which it shouldn't have done. We knew that was going to happen. It sinks below the rods and no longer can effectively cool the rods. If they aren't cool, they will eventually melt. So far, the exposure time hasn't been significant enough, but that leads you to the next one. Nuclear meltdown! In our society, that means usually somebody's gone postal. But in this case, it doesn't. If the nuclear rods, these are the rods, these are the actual, just like they are in my tummy, this is the actual fuel. And they're almost like Legos, actually more than M&Ms, but can't eat Legos. Or I haven't tried since I was about 4. They're in these protective containers rods. Now, if the rods are exposed without water for too long, they'll eventually get hot enough, and they melt the metal that covers the pellets. They're inside the rods. There's radioactive material released inside the rods, but it's still contained inside the rod. Well, if it continues to get hotter and hotter, the M&Ms don't melt because they're the fuel, but the rods do. And so all of the pellets come out, and they're in the center now of the reactor, and they pile up at the bottom of the chamber. That's what happens. They just go to the bottom. But, as I told you last night, this one is different than Chernobyl. This one has all of those pellets still in a pressure cooker. And it's covered. It's this. This is the containment. This is a wall of concrete and steel. It's the pressure cooker. So still, if this happens, nuclear meltdown, still no damage to the people outside of the plant. Experts told me today that nuclear meltdown is much better to be described as core damage, not meltdown. Next one you're hearing is the China syndrome, and we can thank Jane Fonda for this one. Oh, in Jane Fonda land, here's what happens. The pellets all sit there, and then they start to melt. But they don't melt. They melt in your mouth, not at the bottom of the reactor, Jane. Doesn't happen. They collect at the bottom of the reactor, and then they plow through the 8 feet of concrete and steel, and they keep going all the way to China, which will be hard because it'd have to go north pretty quickly. I guess this would be not the China syndrome if this were real. It would be more like the, I don't know, Norman, Oklahoma syndrome. It would burn a hole through the earth. Okay, does that sound even reasonable? Nothing like that has ever even happened at the worst nuclear incident in history, Chernobyl. And experts verify not going to happen. It's impossible. It's a movie. Now, update. Last night, more explosions. The 3rd explosion in 4 days. What we keep seeing played over and over and over and over again is this. This is what happens because engineers have to release the pressure from the pressure cooker. Remember I told you? The steam, as it comes out, it has to be released. The hydrogen release reacts with the oxygen, and it causes the explosion. It was causing the explosion for the top of the outer containment. They have to release that. It's a risk they have to take that this will blow off, knowing that they still have the pressure cooker, the main containment structure around the reactor. They say that that is still intact. Now, you're hearing about radiation in the air. Let's have some perspective. The latest explosion at the number 2 reactor may have leaked radioactive materials into the air. The plant operators say its reading had reached more than 8,000 microsieverts per hour. I don't know about you, but my doctor says stay under 1,000 microsieverts. I don't even know what a microsievert is. Do you think any of these clowns on television do? No. I'm just here to admit it. They describe it to me as the equivalent of 8 times the radiation that you would get in a year. Going through the airports, getting chest x-ray, and everything else. 8 times that. Now, that reading fell sharply, and the peak was still far below the level which would have caused immediate damage to your health. The levels monitored at the plant as of earlier this morning range between 30 and 400 millisieverts per hour. Okay, the next one is, it's Chernobyl. It's Chernobyl all over again. No, it's not Chernobyl. There are several huge differences between this one and Chernobyl. First, Chernobyl killed as few as 60 people, and eventually may kill as many as what we told you last night, 4,000. I told you last night, but I can't believe how much email I had on it because they were saying, oh, Glenn, you got that wrong. No, the UN says eventually 4,000 people. So that's the top of the crazy range, 4,000 people in Chernobyl. This disaster here in Japan has killed 0. Could it kill more? Yes, it could. Second, Chernobyl disaster was triggered by human error. Japan brought on by a natural disaster. Third difference between Chernobyl and Japan. The plant at Chernobyl had severe design flaws. It was designed by the people who designed the ZIL. Do you remember that crappy car? Yeah, same people. Don't let them make power plants. Chernobyl used graphite with the control rods instead of water. Well, what's the difference between graphite and water? Graphite catches fire. Bad. Water. Good. Chernobyl's graphite helped trigger the explosion. And here's the most important part. They didn't have this. There was no outer containment structure around the core. It was this. So when it exploded, the M&Ms shot out all over. Somebody's going to have to clean that up with their mouth. I volunteer. In Japan, it can't happen. They have the thick containment walls that would most likely contain radioactive material even in the event of this meltdown. However, because of the update now of the explosion last night, We do not know for sure, but here's the worst case, the worst news I've heard, that the explosion may have caused a crack in the containment core. If that's true, that's trouble. According to the Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency in Japan, the suppression chamber may have been damaged. That's the difference. But do they have anything in common, Chernobyl and Japan? Yes. Yes, they do. My M&Ms, I will be back for you later. They have one thing in common. Heroes. Remarkable people. You're not hearing about them very much because, is there a power plant that's on a fault line in Minot, North Dakota? How about we focus on the heroes? After the Chernobyl explosion, and many around the area of the plant, they fled. They left. Workers, everybody, get the heck out of there. But not everybody did. Just like in America, when the tough get going, the going get tough. And those are usually the firefighters. In Chernobyl, Moscow firefighters like Victor Birkin, he rushed straight into the more than 300 toxic fires that were burning in Chernobyl, out of control. He knew the risks. He knew what would happen if they didn't go in. So he drove his truck 50 feet from the reactor, got in, and with his bare hands took the fire hose and began siphoning water from the cooling pool. He started feeling the effects of radiation within seconds. Within about a minute, he began to vomit over and over again. He eventually was too dizzy and too weak to continue to battle the blaze. For over an hour, he did it while vomiting. He finally couldn't do it anymore. Believe it or not, this man survived. But dozens of his colleagues died during that day fighting the fires at Chernobyl, which they contained in 5 hours. In Japan, there are now about 50 workers left fighting to keep this plant under relative control. There's usually 1,400 people. 50 are left. They pulled out over 750 employees from the plant just recently. The engineers are experts, and they know the risks. They are heroes. But you haven't really heard anything about them yet, have you? There are also reports that scientists are volunteering to help. Heroes. We have a choice. Face the truth, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And if things go wrong, who do we become? Back in a minute. I want you to know, I mean it sincerely, that I think that the media is doing the country, in some ways, a service by focusing on the nuclear power plant in Japan and showing all the power plants here. Because is a earthquake possible at a power plant here in America? Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Should you go out and get iodine tablets? I don't know. Maybe. If you live around one, it wouldn't hurt, but what are the odds?